The archetypal unidentified flying object is the flying saucer. Reports of convex, disc-shaped objects are the most common type of UFO sighting. Many ufologists point to the shape as an indication of their extraterrestrial origins. But Sightings has uncovered information that many governments, including our own, have designed and tested flying saucers.
Major Keyhole, as author of the book Flying Saucers Are Real, what is your opinion of these new sightings of unidentified objects?
With all due respect to the Air Force, I believe that some of them will prove to be of interplanetary origin.
Flying saucers have invaded our planet.
In the 1950s, nearly every science fiction movie featured flying saucers hell-bent on interplanetary destruction. Looking back today, these encounters seem comical, even ridiculous. But it's important to remember that at the time, many Americans felt that flying saucers like these were a real threat.
At that time, I realized that certainly we were not the only civilization in this universe or galaxy.
The first known flying saucer sighting was reported in June 1947 by pilot Kenneth Arnold, who saw several disc-shaped craft. And 3 weeks later, there was a mysterious crash near Roswell, New Mexico.
My dad had special training in investigating aircraft accidents, and he knew what he was looking at. And what he saw was not a normal aircraft.
As a child, Dr. Jesse Marcel saw with his own eyes debris from the crash site. His father, an Army intelligence officer, brought some of the wreckage home the night of the crash.
He brought the debris in, we looked at it, spread it out on the kitchen floor. There was this, like a black plastic Bakelite material. There was metal foil, and then there were I-beams that had a purplish symbol written across the margin of it.
The end of World War II and the emergence of flying saucer sightings may be more than a coincidence, according to some aviation experts who believe many saucers have an earthly origin.
The Germans had been working on a disc-shaped aircraft at the end of World War II that would have been brought to the United States. And then our engineers, you might say, made a better model of that craft.
There is evidence that as early as 1941, German engineers had successfully built and tested sophisticated aircraft resembling flying saucers. After the war, some of Germany's top aeronautical designers moved to America, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. Did they bring their saucer plans with them? Apparently they did. This is rare, declassified footage of a saucer-shaped craft built and tested by the U.S. Air Force and dubbed the Avro car. A sightings investigation unearthed the original Avro car prototype, forgotten in an obscure hangar just outside Washington, D.C.
The Avro car was developed in the late 1950s as an experimental test vehicle for vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. They had intended to create an aircraft which would fly at regular aircraft altitudes and speeds in excess of 300 miles an hour.
Now, you can say they were built by aliens, or you could say that they were built by humans, you know. And it's most likely that one of the major governments in the world, Soviet, American, British, had built something like that.
There are other indications that the military had ambitious plans for the flying saucer design. The film you're watching is not science fiction. It is a rarely seen Air Force training film.
Fire the ultimate weapon. This isn't fantasy, nor is it necessarily a faithful look at the future, for new discoveries may alter our course.
In addition to films and documents, there are a few eyewitnesses who have dared to speak publicly. In 1967, at MacDill Air Force Base in Florida, Jack Pickett and a friend made a startling discovery.
We were near a restricted area of the base, and all of a sudden we saw 4 aircraft parked out there, and our immediate reaction to each other was, my gosh, those are flying saucers. Those things really do exist.
As publisher of the base newspaper, Pickett asked for permission to write an article and publish photos of the flying saucers he had seen.
I was called up to the Adjutant General's office. He went over to a file cabinet and got out a whole bunch of photographs. And he proceeded to lay these photographs out on a large table so that I could look at them. Well, of course, my interest perked up instantly when I began to see literally hundreds of photographs of all types of quote-unquote flying saucers.
George Filer is a former Air Force intelligence officer who has interviewed Jack Pickett. He believes Pickett's story is genuine and very significant.
A lot of people say, well, how can something be kept secret for 50 years? Well, I point out that the F-117 stealth fighter was kept secret for approximately 10 years. And most of us didn't know that it existed until the government released the information.
I pointedly asked him, not only are these where the flying saucers stories came from, is this what they were? And he said, yes. Well, I was awestruck. I couldn't really believe I was seeing what I was seeing. Some of those photographs had many, many aircraft in them, and they were all easily identifiable as Air Force photographs are. And I asked him, well, how high and how fast could these things go? You hear all these stories. And he said, well, this particular aircraft could go fast enough and high enough to actually achieve space flight. And I had no idea when he was telling me this story that wouldn't be too long before they were declared non-existent.
Interestingly, in the days just before Pickett's discovery of the saucers at MacDill, there had been a rash of UFO sightings in the area. Were the two events connected? We may never know, because not only was Jack Pickett denied access to the saucer photos, the Air Force began to deny their very existence.
This is an illustration of one of the largest ones parked down there. In fact, it was the largest. It was nearly 100 feet across. Yes, hello.
22 years after his initial sightings, Pickett has launched a one-man campaign to have the saucer photos, if not declassified, at least acknowledged.
When I initially wrote, I began to get answers back. They didn't have the faintest idea of what I was talking about. I got letters from high-ranking officers that they had no record of such an aircraft ever existing, so I knew that it was top secret again.
But why maintain secrecy about a 2-decade-old project using World War II technology? Some researchers believe it's because flying saucer projects are still ongoing, and that the technology to build them has not come from a foreign country, but from a foreign civilization. Ufologists believe that the crash at Roswell was not the result of a military saucer project, but the birth of one. That wreckage from Roswell was transported to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base for a reason.
Wright-Patterson had something unique to our government, and that was the Technical Intelligence Organization, so-called T2, or what became the Foreign Technology Division. This is the sort of division that would have been appropriate to use for the investigation of UFO research.
In fact, in the years following the Roswell incident, 3 former government employees who had worked at Wright Field all applied for U.S. patents for flying saucers. But it would be nearly 40 years before any government employee would state publicly that not only does the military test flying saucers, but that they have been created by stealing technology from captured extraterrestrial craft. In a rare interview for Sightings, aerospace engineer Bob Lazar claimed that he had been part of a team charged with reverse engineering a flying saucer of unknown origin at Area 51 in Nevada.
Our job was basically to look at these recovered discs, and I say recovered because I don't know really where they came from, whether they were given to us, we found them, shot them down, who knows what. But our group basically was to back engineer them, which means to start with a finished product and go backward and see how it was fabricated, and try and duplicate some of that technology with earthly materials.
The question is no longer, do they exist? Strange experimental craft are being piloted through our atmosphere. The new question is, how many of them are ours? How many of them were created by the sweat of human endeavor? And are any the earthly cousins of a captured extraterrestrial craft?
So there's something out there that people are seeing. And the question, of course, is who do they belong to? A lot of people say they're from deep space, you know, but they could just as easily be from this world.
The saucer shape, although predominant in science fiction, represents only a small part of UFO designs. There have been numerous documented sightings of cones, cylinders, and spheres with propulsion patterns that no one, including former military engineers, can recreate. Recently, Sightings brought you an extended report on government experiments with saucer-shaped aircraft. We showed you the LBRY car, a crude experimental craft first tested in the 1950s. Well, now, newly declassified documents reveal that the military was testing and flying much more sophisticated saucer designs. The secret project was codenamed Silverbug. Near the end of World War II, the Allied forces had gained complete air superiority over Hitler's Luftwaffe. The Germans were desperate. They ordered the immediate development of an aircraft capable of vertical takeoffs and landings, because nearly all of their runways had been destroyed. The project was spearheaded by Dr. Richard Mita, known today as the father of saucerology.
Dr. Mita was hired by the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, to build a saucer-shaped craft that could vertically ascend and, with rockets, shoot down large numbers of Allied planes.
But the Germans were too late. The war ended before Mita's saucer got off the drawing boards. But his designs and technological breakthroughs did not go unnoticed by the American military.
We had large numbers of technical people searching through Germany as they were moving right behind the troops. They began in April of 1945, and they would send back everything they found.
And according to Alexander Flax, former Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, German technology wasn't the only thing being shipped to North America. After World War II, Dr. Mita himself began work on a secret aircraft project at LBRY Aeronautics in Canada.
Dr. Mita at LBRY was working on some of the concepts that were derived from the German experience. And there were certainly saucer-like flying machines. Anybody looking at them could have decided that these were indeed flying saucers.
And there is evidence that soon after the war, the United States had also launched a super-secret project to develop vertical flight vehicles.
The vertical takeoff and landing programs had a long, long history. We had many, many programs. Among the three services, I counted at least 35.
Of those 35 saucer projects, the most highly classified was known by the code name Silverbug. Silverbug saucers were designed to fly 2,300 miles per hour at an altitude of 80,000 feet. These designs, dating from 1955, were not declassified until March of 1995. For over 40 years, America's #1 flying saucer project was top secret. But this flying saucer project was not. In the 1950s, while Project Silverbug was under tight wraps, LBRY unveiled the LBRY car to the public. Was this jerry-rigged flop really the best the brilliant Dr. Mita could create?
The LBRY car is just a cover. It's a cover story. What was actually built by LBRY is anybody's guess.
Ufologists believe that the U.S. military had everything to gain and nothing to lose by insinuating that this was the state of the art for flying saucers. It would deflect attention away from real saucers being tested and spotted by amateur skywatchers in the American Southwest.
There is virtually no doubt in my mind that the United States government built German-inspired designs in this country that were probably seen by many people, and probably some crashed.
The release of Silverbug's plans and protocol offers an interesting twist in the great debate over what crashed near Roswell, New Mexico. It could very well have been a flying saucer, but one of ours, not one of theirs, and not the first.
In Germany, at about the turn of the century, many secret societies developed. The Vril machine was built by the Vril Society.
And the Vril saucer was, in turn, based on the instructions left behind by a mysterious ancient cult.
These texts were instructions on how to build this interdimensional machine. They've channeled this information from what they thought were extraterrestrials, built this craft that levitated. The first piloted flight was in 1934, and they knew they had something at that point.
It appears that the saucer silhouette will soon be seen in the skies again. This is the Tier 3 minus UAV. It's a state-of-the-art surveillance drone built at the world-famous Lockheed Martin Skunk Works in Palmdale, California. Looking at this aircraft head-on, one can't help but observe that saucers are real.